Now let's move on to the two wills. Because if you know a little bit of church history, you'll know that there was a struggle in the time of St. Maximus against the heresy of monothelitism, the one will. This was somewhat of an extension or a temptation to somehow compromise toward the Monophysites and bring about a union. And there were a number of bishops, if almost all major episcopacies in the East had compromised on this. And for the sake of a political union, which is so often the politics enter into the church, the worldly desires and power and all the rest. So the faith of the church clearly was established through St. Maximus and at the ecumenical councils that followed against the heresy of the idea that Christ has only one will. Since Christ assumed the human nature, he also acquired a human will. Kind of straightforward, right? It seems pretty basic, right? Human nature, going to have a human will. Just as each man is of his nature volitional, so too did our Lord Jesus Christ have a natural will. And because the two natures are preserved intact even after the union, this is the key that separates with the Monophysites, Christ has both two wills and two energies, divine and human. Neither is the divine and uncreated natural nature without existence, will, and energy, nor, of course, is the created and human essence with existence, will, and energy. Let me see if there's a typo here. Ούτε βέβαια γνωρίζουμε την δημιουργημένη και ανθρώπινη ουσία δίχως ύπαρξη και θέληση και ενέργεια. Θέληση, ενέργεια, ούτε βέβαια γνωρίζουμε την δημιουργημένη και ανθρώπινη ουσία, nor, of course, is the created, and this is actually, we're translating together with my son, and I think we're taking from an existing translation of the Heterodox, which is often the case, right? We're trying to use existing translations, but there might be something wrong here. Nor, of course, is the created and human essence should be without. Ούτε βέβαια γνωρίζουμε την δημιουργημένη και ανθρώπινη ουσία, δίχως ύπαρξη και θέληση. Dichos, which is without. So that's a typo. Let me correct that. We don't know. In other words, we don't know of the created and human essence. There's no such thing as without the existence and will and energy. The joint expression of Christ's two wills is seen at his prayer in Gethsemane. When he entered God, his Father, when he entreated, rather, God his Father, let not my will be done, but thine. The will of the Son is naturally the will of the Father, and eager, while the human will, because of the weakness of the flesh, shows for a moment that it would avoid the passion of the cross. So here you see an expression of the two wills on display. Treats to God the Father, let not my will be done, but thine. Of course, the will of the Son is the will of the Father, and yet we have the human will. Because of the human will and the weakness of the flesh, which he entirely took on, there is this, for a moment, this desire to avoid the passion on the cross. St. Maximus, the confessor, St. John Damascene, give us even more understanding here with regard to the two wills. They say, while as God, rather, this is the author, and then we quote the saints. While as God and man, the Lord has a divine and a human will, the two wills are not opposed to each other. For the human will has been deified because of the union and freely submitted to the divine will. St. Maximus says, the natural ability of will of the incarnate Logos was moved and molded by his divine will. His human will was, of course, not almighty by nature, but since it became the will of God, the Word, it became almighty as well. St. John Damascene. His human will was obedient and subordinate to his divine will, not being guided by its own inclination, but willing those things which the divine will willed. Gets a little bit dicey in English, right? But actually this is really not far from what we have in the original Greek. Let me just say, for those of you who know Greek, ala thelondes αυτά που ήθελε το θείο του θέλημα. Thelondes, theo to thelima, ήθελε. So again and again, the question of the will. So his human will was obedient and subordinate to his divine will, not being guided by its own inclination, but willing those things which the divine will willed. The one Christ, when he willed, allowed the flesh to act its proper things. As man, he wanted to eat, to drink, and the like, in accordance with human nature. When his divine volition so willed it, it permitted the flesh to suffer and do that which was proper to it. When he had fasted for 40 days, then he willed and hungered, for he permitted the human nature to do as is natural for it. It's very, very interesting, isn't it? It's different. If you understand this, you probably have had or have a different understanding of what happened, for instance, during the 40 days in the desert. As man, he wanted to eat and drink and the like in accordance with human nature. When his divine volition was so willed, volition here is thelesi. There's a slight differentiation between thelesi and thelima in Greek. So we're rendering thelesi for volition. When his divine volition so willed, it permitted the flesh to suffer and do that which was proper to it. So he permits it. He's not bound by it, right? When he had fasted 40 days, then he willed and hungered, permitted the human nature to do as is natural for it. The Lord has a divine and human natural will, but he did not have a gnomic will. Gnomic will. This is an important term. We'll unpack this in a second. A gnomic will. The natural will is the willing power of the natural desire. He has this. The natural desire and rational appetite, which every man has, while the gnomic will is the manner of willing, that which depends on the volition. He says here, St. John, the Lord, being not mere man, but also God, and knowing all things, had no need of inquiry, investigation, counsel, decision, and by nature made whatever is good his own, and whatever is bad foreign to him. So the manner of willing is not there. The natural desire, rational appetite, of course, existed, but the manner of willing, which depends on volition, is not there. So you'll step by step, I think, bear with us. We'll have more and more to unpack here. According to the Holy Fathers, we cannot speak of Christ as having judgment, nomi, and preference. Christ's human will could not be gnomic, having preference. In other words, changeable. Or anything other but only natural. Christ's hypostasis was not a common human hypostasis, subject to some preference of change, tropie. Rather, it was the hypostasis of God, the Word, and was therefore unchangeable and obviously sinless. This is from one of our professors in Thessaloniki, his dogmatic theology of the Orthodox Church, Professor Tingos. Let me reread this. This is sometimes it's good to hear it again and again. Christ's human will could not be gnomic, having preference. In other words, changeable. All right, so if you think gnomic, preference, changeable. His human will was not like this, or anything only but natural. Christ's hypostasis was not a common human hypostasis, subject to some preference of change. It's united to the divine, and therefore these things were not working within him. Rather, it was the hypostasis of God, the Word. and was therefore unchangeable and obviously sinless.